This video is co-written by KHT and Squirrel Boy. Their socials are in the description. KHT was also kind enough to provide the gameplay for this video. I suppose the first question that I'm going to have to answer here is who am I and where is this information coming from? Because what I'm going to present here might be a little bit spicy. There's nothing secret, there's nothing that'll get anyone in trouble, but there's enough information here that's interesting enough that I think I might have to provide a few qualifications. Basically, I'm a guy who achieved a modest level of notoriety in the Battlefield community sometime around the middle of Battlefield 4's life cycle. And at that point, I was working with the Synthic to provide information that I thought was useful to the player base. And the fact that I was still occupying a relatively empty niche in the landscape of content creators at the time made me a small collection of useful industry contacts. So that was Visceral, DICE, Sweden, LA. And over the years, I've been collecting rumors and bits of information and would like to finally present what I know about what's going on with Battlefield 5 and surface a little bit of information on why Battlefield 5 failed. I've seen many content creators attempt to approach this issue, but I don't think any of them has managed to get it all right. I've seen some people that get some of it right, but they don't necessarily draw the right conclusions from it, or they don't get it all right. So in short, the issue that we're going to be looking at here is whose fault is Battlefield 5's failure? Battlefield 5 is an abject failure. EA execs know it, players know it, and even the investors know it. And its failure has been already well priced into EA's stock. All the resources that would have been diverted to BFV have been taken away from this failed product and put into the next investment. Why do you think the live service has been so slow, and why do you think it's literally just ended years before it was supposed to originally? There's no reason to spend resources on a game that is so dead. But do DICE leads really know it? I think head in the sand is an apt descriptor here from what I've heard. There's one account that suggests that the leads might still think that they made a good product. It's not us who are out of touch, it's the players. Someone told me a little about the launch party for Battlefield 5, and essentially the leads were toasting and drinking to the success of the game and celebrating a well-launched product, while the people who are responsible for developing the product, the people really working on it, knew from the beginning that it was going to be a failure. I think the metrics at this point have been poor enough that they are beginning to realize that maybe they made a mistake here. But will DICE solve these problems for the next title? They will not. 5.2 was their big attempt to breathe new life into this game, and they ruined, really, the only thing that people found fun about it. The gunplay wasn't perfect in Battlefield 5. I think it catered overmuch to the idea that you didn't need random spread and it could be replaced by recoil. I think it makes the guns very uncomfortable to use, especially because they don't decouple from the center of the screen. But what 5.2 tells me is that the leads truly do not understand what part of the game is fun, or how to make their game fun, because they entirely misidentify the issues. As far as they were concerned, the failure of Battlefield 5 was due to churn, which is in turn due to the gunplay. They believed that the time to kill was too fast. Based on the halfway revert, I think they've realized that maybe this is not the case, but they weren't entirely willing to admit that they were completely wrong. But what this does tell me is that it is completely clear that DICE is not capable of identifying where they went wrong. But how did they make good games in the past? Was Battlefield 3 a fluke? Were fun Battlefield games an exception to the rule? I don't believe, personally, that Battlefield 3 could be created by the DICE of today. Talent has been bleeding left and right from DICE for over a year now. If you've been paying attention to the Glassdoor reviews, if you've been paying attention to the job openings, I should remind you that a weapon designer slot came open basically exactly when 5.2 was launched. I can tell you that I personally know some people and I follow some people on Twitter who have left DICE, very talented developers. I think the people who knew how to make a good game are gone by now. And I think the people who really didn't understand why Battlefield 3 was fun are now the people in leadership. So why is Battlefield 5 a failure? I've discussed this plenty on the channel, but I'd like to summarize it a bit here. Battlefield 5, in short, was designed for a player base that does not exist. It forces you to choose between team play and winning and having fun. Having fun, winning, and team play should not be mutually exclusive, yet in Battlefield they are. The vast majority of gamers are people who get off work and school and want to relax and frag a bit. It's like you create this thing that people enjoy, which is the shooting part, and then you lock it behind either a meaningless and boring task, which is running to a supply crate, or the performance of your teammates, which you cannot control. Tying a player's performance to factors that are outside of their control is, simply put, a recipe for toxicity and frustration. Let's compare. In Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield Hardline, Battlefield 1, there were team play items. There were team play classes. But these team play items and classes existed for players to discover after they get to enjoy the core shooting experience of the first-person shooter. Team play that's required by the game is certain to be disastrous. Let team play be an option to achieve higher levels of performance, but don't make it mandatory. Forced team play is what has created the paradoxical disaster of Battlefield 5, a game where players are supposed to be able to have freedom and a sandbox to play how they want to play, but also be forced to rely on the goodwill and competence of random players to be able to play a shooter at a basic, functional level. You literally cannot shoot if you don't have the goodwill and cooperation of your teammates, or you're willing to complete ridiculous fetch quests. But this was just like the Refractor BF is something that I've heard. And it is. It's probably the closest thing to Battlefield 2 that we've had in recent memory. But here's the thing. Battlefield 2 is not a good game. And I know I'm going to immediately get hate for this, but you have to look at it from the perspective of 2020, not from 2005 when it was originally released. Battlefield 2 was a game that had a really niche audience, and also existed back when the world didn't really care as much as it does now about gaming. It was a 2005 game held to 2005 standards, and benchmarks for gameplay have developed alongside benchmarks for visuals. We expect better visuals, we expect better performance in games of today. Why should we not expect better gameplay? It would not have an audience today, because we have standards that have now grown alongside the games industry. I mean, to be honest, it didn't really have an audience then. It was totally eclipsed by the fun-oriented COD 4 and CSS. It is economically suicidal, and apparently DICE leads did not realize this, to chase a dead, niche audience. The core Battlefield experience. What is the core Battlefield experience? Some would have you believe that it peaked in Battlefield 2. But we can't look at this game design with rose-tinted glasses. Even if you play today, older games populated with their hardcore player base that have played it for what is it now, like 15 years, they play the game properly. I'm willing to bet if that Modern Warfare 2, which is regarded as one of the best games ever, if Modern Warfare 2 were released today instead of Modern Warfare 2019, players would be absolutely revolted. Think 4-bullet kill, 800 RPM M4 laser beam is annoying. Remember that you had a 2-bullet kill, 845 RPM, UMP 45 with rapid fire and stopping power. 725 annoying, 1887 akimbo. But given that this is still a pure FPS experience, I doubt Modern Warfare 2 would be as repulsive to the modern market as BF2 would be. If you think that not being healed or revived in Battlefield 5 is frustrating, consider the reality of Battlefield 2. 7 classes made medics fewer and further apart. Likewise, getting more ammo or getting your vehicle repaired by random is difficult for the same reason. Your abilities are spread across 7 classes instead of 4. The nade spam of Battlefield Meat Grinders, which is rightfully worthy of complaints, doesn't even compare to the original Strike at Karkan, when 5 of the 7 classes could carry 4 grenades each, and each grenade had roughly a 50% greater blast radius than they do on Battlefield 5. The classes without the 4 grenades had rocket launchers and grenade launchers. And it's not as if players back in the day were smarter or less toxic either. And if anything, I find that players today are far better than they were before. I think gaming has really reached a mainstream audience. Being very good at games, at least when I was a kid, was definitely a nerd thing. I think now it's very much entered the mainstream. But the point is that shooters aren't fun if you can't shoot. Fragmenting the basic functions of a game, the ability to defeat things that threaten you, the ability to recover and protect yourself from things that threaten you, between 7 separate classes was a mistake in 2005, and Battlefield 5 shows that it continues to be a mistake today. Battlefield 3, I will remind you, was the first game that really took off in this franchise. It was accessible, it was fun to play, and it hit a lot of depth in its gameplay. Battlefield 2, on the other hand, was particularly anti-fun and definitely wouldn't hold up today, as evidenced by the abject failure of Battlefield 5, which only took a small part of the anti-fun nature of Battlefield 2. So the question which I brought up at the beginning, and probably the most important part of this video, is how did this happen? How did DICE go from producing Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, to producing what has become Battlefield 5? How did Battlefield 5 get through QA to market? Well, from what I've heard, it didn't. There are 2 camps at DICE. There's a group of developers who understand gaming and know how to make a fun product. Then there are a few leads who can't figure out what makes a game fun. This is something that I've heard rumors supporting for years, but Tigger, ex-multiplayer producer at DICE, confirmed this explicitly a few days ago on this Reddit comment. Let's just say that there are 2 camps internally on the matter. Anyway, back in the Battlefield 4 CTE era, there was a private Skype chat that acted as a focus group for some of the changes that were being introduced. It featured a few devs, and one of them mentioned that this sort of thing, attrition, press E to team play, garbage TTK, had been tried a few times, but it never made it through UXR. UXR, User Experience Review, looked at it and every time complained, I can't heal, this game isn't fun. This happened again for Battlefield 5. QA rejected it, UXR rejected it, and even many devs thought it was a terrible product. Battlefield 5 was sent to a focus group where it received below average marks in every aspect of its gameplay except gunplay. Simply put, it does not have any appeal outside of niche Reddit posters and people who don't even play the game. Chief among these being Battle Nonsense, an influencer who advocates for every single mechanic that contributed to Battlefield 5's failure. He has played a total of 19 hours in Battlefield 5 in 2019. It should have died there, but QA people weren't the only ones who were given a chance to try the game. The Game Changers is something relatively recent, and they're a group of content creators and influencers who were shown the game and bought into the sales pitch, hook, line, and sinker. Let's listen to this exact sales pitch, repeated by Jack Frags.
The next big change, attrition and physical interactions only. No more magic medic and ammo auras that passively give you health and ammo back.
I truly do not understand this fixation that people had with the idea of 1-to-1 animation to action ratio. Games are an abstraction anyway, and players know it. The only time you really need an animation is if you specifically need to slow an action down or prevent people from performing other actions at the same time. But the thing is, healing and resupply were already time-based, and suppression already prevented you from healing during a fight, so it serves no purpose whatsoever. I think as we witness these animations over and over and over and over again for the 5 billion first time, we realize that seeing this again and again is just kind of exhausting on the eyes and is strictly unnecessary. This is one of the things that aged really badly about the initial promotions for Battlefield 5. Further, this kind of load on the animation team where you have to animate everything pretty much ensures that you're going to get a lot of low-quality animations over few high-quality ones. Animating everything isn't necessarily the worst idea in the world, but it definitely goes under the nice-to-have category and shouldn't be accomplished at the expense of must-haves. There are other must-haves that Battlefield 5 completely missed the mark on in favor of these nice-to-haves and want-to-haves. Battlefield 5 is the ritual sacrifice of must-haves in favor of want-to-haves and nice-to-haves. I'd say that you who are responsible for this know who you are, but I think that might be giving you a little bit too much credit. Actual must-haves like stability, playability, and performance were ignored. We'll talk a little bit more about scope creep later.
Take some damage and you might only auto-regen to, let's say, 33 health points. You really need to think and prepare your next step.
Think and plan your next step? This is almost verbatim what leadership was saying when they were trying to promote these bad ideas, so I guess I know exactly where Jack got these talking points. This is a ridiculously idealized view of how people play this game, and has no reflection whatsoever in reality. Running out of ammo doesn't make you think and plan your next step. It's just an inconvenience that removes you from the action of shooting, which is assumedly why you're playing the shooter in the first place, so that you can go run a fetch quest to a supply depot to get ammo. It's not some 1,000 IQ decision-making stimulus, it's an inconvenience.
No more shooting at 3D icons and Doritos. You have to scan the world, look carefully, and listen. Did that tall grass over there just move? Then maybe there's a player crawling through it.
I think leadership had this idea somehow that bad visibility would slow down the game and make it some sort of billion IQ tactical event, when the reality is that players are just going to die to things they can't see and get frustrated. Fact is that no one wants to sit and stare at the grass in some sort of perverse vision test, except for extremely niche players that definitely do not represent the people who actually buy your game.
So with the new attrition system, you'll be spawning into the game with much less ammo too. Reduced, but capable. So all of this introduces a step of planning and preparation for the player, aiming to eliminate that spawn run die mentality. And it's starting to sound like this is a much more tactical and strategic game.
Now this is something that definitely did not get thought through. Like every other design concept pushed for in Battlefield 5, it stops making any sense the moment you think about it for more than a couple minutes. How can attrition possibly affect the run spawn die loop when literally one of the most reliable and fastest ways to get ammo is to die? And how could this stop the run spawn die loop when the people who are run spawn dying are the only people in the game who are not affected by attrition because they do not live long enough? Truly smooth-brained. I want to be clear that this is not specifically an indictment of Jack Frags. It's an indictment of the hype and the failure to engage in critical thinking that I witnessed in all influencers responsible for covering this game's launch. Jack's video was simply the most comprehensive and most directly quoted the talking points provided by leadership. I ask you, please, if you have an audience, really stop, really turn on the skepticism, and really think about everything you're being told. Remember, you were told that 5.2 wouldn't be a TTK change, and how did that turn out? If you don't, you're probably going to end up in a duck video in a year where I get to say, wow, this really aged like milk. Game Changers promoted a product based on some buzzwords that sounded good. The terms that I hear again and again are squad play, every action requires input, physical and balanced, attrition. Battlefield 5 is a kiosk demo game. It looks good until you play it for more than 15 minutes. But it evidently took more than 15 minutes for the GCs to express that the game was a failure. This gave the leads at DICE all the encouragement that they needed to push ahead with a design that was rejected by QA. But do they really listen that closely to GCs? And before you get your pitchforks out for the YouTubers, don't think that they really listen to them. The fact is that they will only listen to Game Changers if the Game Changers already happen to support the pre-existing point of view of leads. There is very little that is the direct result of a game changer in fact, none, that is the direct result of a game changer promoting an idea. Battlefield 5 might have actually been reworked had game changers really stepped back, stepped away from the blind optimism, stepped away from the sales pitches, and really looked at what Battlefield 5 was going to be. But the fact is that it's all you guys who are now struggling to get views for Battlefield because it really is a dying game at this point. You became basically just proxies for a particular group of leads who dogmatically insisted on creating a game based on a flawed set of suppositions. Essentially, people who don't know how to make a fun game created a product and a sales pitch, and y'all just fucking ran with it. But really, I don't think game changers are at fault here. And I myself have been guilty of unbounded and unwarranted optimism, especially when it came to Battlefield 1. So really, I don't think the game changers are at fault because they were just repeating a sales pitch. The people who are at fault are the people who created these ideas, leadership. A leader is responsible for everything his followers do or do not achieve. Frankly, Battlefield 5 is an insult to the many talented individuals at DICE who were forced to work on a project that they did not feel worthy of the Battlefield name. I've heard this repeated over and over from different sources. Management is out of touch and has their own vision, contrary to the reality of what players enjoy, of how a Battlefield game should play. Leadership's priorities have focused on everything except the necessities for a shooter game. Like I stated at the beginning of the vehicle, must-haves have been sidelined in the favor of want-to-haves. This sort of scope creep, where leadership has been constantly requesting things that are cool over things that are necessary, has made Battlefield 5 more feature-bloated instead of better. And this has characterized Battlefield 5's entire development process, which is perhaps why we have vehicle towing. And how long did that take to implement? But we still don't have a good anti-cheat, good performance, or even a fun gameplay loop. It's almost comical how we have these cool tech features, but we don't have the basics of what makes a shooter good. Leadership does not understand how to focus the application of their limited production resources to achieve a specific, achievable goal, but instead has chosen to spread their production over things that were cool, but ultimately not necessary. I have absolutely no reason to believe that this trend will not continue into Battlefield 6. Unwilling to create products that they know are flawed, talent has been leaving Stockholm in waves. Are you advocating hope for Battlefield 6? Wrong attitude. Only a concerted, unified opposition will ever get this franchise turned around. Remember that leads don't listen to you, unless you already happen to support their ideas. So contrary opinions will have to be stronger for it. But I don't think it can be turned around, at least as far as Stockholm is concerned. DICE has been bleeding talent, as I've said, and it's going to take more than just opposition from the community to return it to the state that made Battlefield 3 and fixed Battlefield 4. A serious restructuring is in order, and I'm morbidly curious to see how it turns out.